like distant insects, a sound so familiar it had become silence. Outside, the late October rain tapped insistently against the tall windows of Lincoln High, blurring the parking lot into streaks of red taillights and sodium yellow glow. Inside, only two people remained. Ms. Elena Voss, 31, literature PhD unfinished, divorce papers still warm in a drawer she never opened, sat at her desk marking the last of the AP Lit essays. Her dark hair was pulled into a low knot that had begun to unravel hours earlier. A single silver hairpin dangled, forgotten, above her left ear. Across the room, on the very last desk in the third row, sat Rowan Calder, 18, senior, captain of the debate team that had just placed second at nationals. 6'1" with the careless grace of someone who had never needed to try very hard to be noticed. Until recently. Until her. He wasn't pretending to read anymore. The worn copy of The Great Gatsby lay open to page 92, untouched for the last 23 minutes. Instead, his eyes followed the slow scratch of her red pen, the way her lower lip caught briefly between her teeth when she encountered a particularly tangled sentence, the faint crease that appeared between her brows when she disagreed with a student's interpretation, but didn't quite know how savage she wanted to be in the margin. The clock above the door read 4:47 p.m. detention, had ended at 4:15. The building was mostly empty. The janitor's cart rattled somewhere far down the C-wing corridor, growing fainter. Elena felt the weight of his stare the way one feels the first drop of rain before the storm arrives. Sudden, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. She set the pen down. Deliberately, the small clack echoed. "You're still here, Rowan." Her voice was low, calm, the same register she used when reading Fitzgerald or Woolf aloud to a half-asleep third period. But something else lived in it now, a thread of warning or perhaps invitation. Even she wasn't sure which. He leaned back in the chair, long legs stretching under the desk until the soles of his sneakers almost touched the leg of the table in front of him. The movement was casual, studied, waiting for the rain to stop, he said. "It's been raining since lunch. Then I've been waiting a long time. A beat, too, the kind of silence that has its own pulse." Elena stood, slowly. The hem of her charcoal pencil skirt brushed the edge of the desk as she moved around it. She didn't walk toward him, not directly. Instead, she crossed the tall windows and looked out at the smeared parking lot, arms folded loosely beneath her breasts. The posture pulled the soft gray silk of her blouse tighter across her shoulders. "You turned in an essay today," she said without turning. 17 pages. Single-spaced, on Daisy Buchanan as a weapon of class warfare, rather than a victim of it. Rowan gave the smallest smile. "You gave me a B+, I gave you a B+ because you wrote like someone trying to win an argument instead of someone trying to understand a human being." She turned her head just enough that he could see the edge of her profile, the faint curve of her cheekbone catching the dying daylight. "There's a difference." He rose then, fluid, unhurried, and walked toward her. Not fast, not slow. The same measured cadence he used when he knew the cross-examination was about to turn brutal, and he still had the winning card in his pocket. He stopped 4 feet away, close enough that she could smell the cedar and rain scent that always clung to his jacket, close enough that she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the one he'd gotten at 14 falling off a skateboard. He was too proud to admit he couldn't ride. "I think I understand more than you give me credit for," he said quietly. Elena met his eyes for the first time since he'd stood up. They were storm gray, serious. Older than 18 had any right to be. She should have said something teacherly, should have reminded him of the handbook, the liability, the line that must never be crossed. Instead, what came out was softer, almost curious. "Then tell me what you understand, Rowan." He took one more step. The distance between them collapsed to something dangerous, something that could be measured in heartbeats rather than inches. "I understand," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "that the moment you stopped pretending not to notice me watching you, everything changed." Her breath caught, just for a second, but he heard it. And in that second, the rain outside seemed to fall harder, as if the sky itself understood what was about to happen next. The rain had thickened into a steady roar against the glass, sealing them inside a world that felt suddenly smaller, more private than any classroom had a right to be. Elena didn't step back. She could have. One measure retreat, and the spell would fracture. She could become the teacher again. Stern voice pointed a reminder of consequences. Instead, she held his gaze and felt the air between them charge like the moment before lightning splits a summer sky. Rowan lifted his hand, slowly palm up, as though asking permission even now. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair that had escaped her knot, tucking it behind her ear with a gentleness that felt almost cruel in its restraint. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds, long enough for her pulse to stutter against the thin skin at her throat. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm cold," she lied. His thumb traced the shell of her ear, then dropped to the sensitive line of her jaw. "Liar." The word landed soft, almost fond. It should have offended her. It didn't. She caught his wrist, not to push him away, but to hold him there, fingers curling around the warm cuff of his hoodie sleeve. His pulse beat steady and quick beneath her thumb, a counter-rhythm to her own erratic one. "This is reckless," she said. The sentence came out quieter than she intended, more confession than warning. "I know. You could ruin me." "I could," he agreed. Then, softer, "You could ruin me too." A laugh escaped her, short, surprised, almost bitter. "You're 18, Rowan. The world still forgives boys for being reckless. It doesn't forgive women for the same thing." His eyes darkened at that, not with anger, with something closer to understanding, or perhaps recognition. "Then let me be the one who's reckless tonight." He leaned in until their foreheads nearly touched. She could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the faint trace of mint from the gum he'd been chewing earlier, the cedar of his jacket, now warmed by his skin. Every rational part of her screamed to stop this, to step back, to remember security cameras in the hallway, the faculty meeting tomorrow, the way gossip moved through this building faster than wildfire. Instead, she tilted her chin up. Their mouths met in a kiss that was neither gentle nor tentative. It was a collision of months of stolen glances, of her pretending not to notice how his eyes lingered when she bent to pick up a dropped pen, of him pretending the extra office hours were only about essay revisions. His lips were warm, insistent. Hers parted almost immediately, a surrender she hadn't planned to give. One of his hands slid to the small of her back, pulling her flush against him. The other cupped the nape of her neck, fingers threading into the loosening knot of her hair until a silver pin finally gave up and clattered to the floor. She made a small sound, half protest, half plea, and he answered it by deepening the kiss, tongue sliding against hers in a slow, deliberate claim. Elena's hands moved of their own accord, one fisted in the soft cotton over his chest. The other slipped beneath the hem of his hoodie, finding the taut plane of his stomach. His skin jumped under her palm, warm and smooth and impossibly young. She felt the quick intake of his breath against her mouth, and something inside her twisted. Guilt and hunger knotted so tightly she couldn't separate them. He broke the kiss first, only far enough to speak against her lips. "Tell me to stop." She should have. The words were right there, heavy on her tongue. Instead, she whispered, "Don't." His mouth found a corner of hers, then the line of her jaw, then the sensitive spot beneath her ear that made her fingers tighten against the skin. She tipped her head back, exposing her throat. He took the invitation without hesitation, teeth grazing lightly, then soothing with his tongue. A shiver raced down her spine and settled low in her belly. The windows were fogging now, their outlines blurred against the dark. Somewhere far off a door slammed, probably the janitor leaving for the night. The sound should have jolted her back to reality. It didn't. Rowan's hand slid lower, fingers splaying over the curve of her hip, then slipping beneath the hem of her skirt to find the bare skin of her thigh just above her knee. The touch was electric. She gasped, hips shifting forward instinctively, pressing against a hard length of him through his jeans. He groaned, low, rough, the sound vibrating against her throat. Elena, hearing her first name in his mouth, felt obscene and perfect at once. She tugged at his hoodie, impatient now, needing more skin, more contact. He helped her yank it over his head in one fluid motion. The t-shirt beneath rolled up, exposing the sharp cut of his hips, the faint trail of dark hair disappearing beneath his waistband. She traced it with her fingertips, marveling at the way his muscles flexed under her touch. He caught her wrist again, brought her palm to his mouth, kissed the center of it, open-mouthed, deliberate, before guided her hand lower, pressing against him so she could feel exactly what she was doing to him. "Feel that?" he breathed. "That's what you've been doing to me since the first week of school." Her cheeks burned, not from embarrassment, from want so sharp it bordered on pain. She pushed him backward until the backs of his thighs hit the edge of her desk. Papers scattered. A coffee mug teetered and fell, rolling across the floor with a dull clunk. Neither of them cared. Elena stepped between his legs, hands on his shoulder for balance as she kissed him again. Harder this time, teeth catching his lower lip, drawing a hiss from him that sent fresh heat pooling between her thighs. His hands roamed freely now, beneath her blouse, along her ribs, thumbs brushing the lace edge of her bra until her nipples tightened painfully against the fabric. When he finally hooked a finger beneath the strap and tugged it down her shoulder, she didn't stop him. The cool air of the classroom kissed her skin. Then his mouth followed, hot, wet, closing over the peak of her breast to the thin silk of her bra. She arched into him with a broken sound she barely recognized as her own. His free hand slid higher beneath her skirt, fingertips grazing the damp lace between her legs. He paused there, breathing hard against her skin. "Tell me you want this," he said, voice wrecked. "Say it." She tangled her fingers in his hair, pulled his head back so she could look into those storm-gray eyes. "I want this," she said clearly, each word deliberate. "I want you." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, triumph, raw need. And then his fingers were slipping beneath the lace, finding her slick and ready and so sensitive she nearly came apart at the first slow stroke. The rain kept falling. The clock kept ticking toward 5. And in the empty classroom on the second floor of Lincoln High, two people who should never have touched crossed every line they had left. The classroom smelled now of rain-soaked wool from his hoodie on the floor, of her perfume, something expensive and citrus edge that had warmed against her pulse points, and of the sharp, intimate scent of arousal that no amount of chalk dust could disguise. Rowan's fingers moved with devastating patience. One slow circle, then another, learning her the way he learned every text they'd ever dissected together. Close reading, no skimming. Every reaction catalogued. When her thighs trembled, he pressed his palm flat against her mound, letting her grind down onto the heel of his hand, while two fingers curled inside her, finding the spot that made her bite her own lip hard enough to taste copper. "Quiet," he whispered against the shell of her ear, even though the building was empty. Someone might still be in the office wing. The warning only made her clench around him harder. He rewarded her with a deeper thrust, thumb finding her clit again in the same unhurried rhythm. Elena's forehead dropped to his shoulder. She muffled the next broken moan against the cotton of his t-shirt. Her nails dug half-moons into the backs of his arms. She had imagined this. Late at night, glass of red wine in hand, telling herself it was harmless fantasy. In her mind it had always been quick, frantic, almost angry. Reality was slower, more cruel. He was taking her apart piece by piece, and she was letting him. When her breathing turned ragged, he withdrew his hand. She made a small, involuntary sound of protest. Rowan caught her chin, tilted her face up. "Desk," he said, "not a request." Elena stepped back on unsteady legs. The edge of the desk caught her thighs. She braced her palms behind her and levered herself up until she was perched on the surface where she graded papers, planned units, wrote recommendation letters for students exactly like him. The irony wasn't lost on her. It only made the heat between her legs pulse harder. He followed, stepping between her knees, pushing them wider with his hips. His jeans were still on. The rough denim scraped the sensitive skin of her inner thighs. She reached for his belt. Fingers clumsy with want, but he caught her wrists, pinned them gently to the wood on either side of her hips. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because if you touch me right now, I won't last long enough to do what I've been thinking about since the day you wore that green dress to the spring poetry reading." Her laugh came out shaky. "You remember that dress?" "I remember every fucking thing you've ever worn in this room." He sank to his knees. The sight of him, 18, broad-shouldered, kneeling between her legs on the industrial carpet she complained about every faculty meeting, should have felt obscene. Instead, it felt like worship. He hooked his fingers in the sides of her panties and drew them down slowly, reverently, letting the black lace drag along her skin until it pulled around one ankle. Then he lifted her left leg over his shoulder, opening her completely. Elena's breath hitched. Rowan. Shoo! His mouth was already on the inside of her knee, then higher, tracing the faint stretch mark on her thigh she'd always hated. He kissed it like it was beautiful, then higher still. The first touch of his tongue was light, almost polite, a tease. She jerked anyway. He made a low, please sound against her and did it again, firmer this time, flattening his tongue to lap a slow stripe from entrance to clit. Her head fell back, the heels of her hands pressed into scattered essays, crumpling them. He ate her like he was starving and had all night to prove it. No rush flicks, no mechanical repetition. He learned her with the same focus he brought to closing arguments. Every hitch of her breath, every roll of her hips, every time her fingers tightened his hair told him exactly where to linger, where to suck, where to press 2 fingers back inside and curl them in time with the slow circles of his tongue. She came the first time without warning. Sharp, sudden, thighs clamping around his ears as her whole body bowed off the desk. He didn't stop. He worked her through it, gentling his touch only when her hips started to twitch away from overstimulation, then building her up again more slowly, more deliberately. By the second orgasm, her voice had gone hoarse. She was begging in fragments. Please, more, Rowan, fuck. Words she never thought she'd say to a student, words that tasted like sin and freedom at once. When he finally stood, his chin glistened, lips swollen and dark. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand in a gesture, so casually filthy her inner muscles fluttered again. He kissed her then, deep, dirty, letting her taste herself on his tongue. She moaned into his mouth, hands finally free to tear at his belt, at his zipper. He helped her shove his jeans and boxers down just enough. His cock sprang free, thick and flushed, the tip already slick. Elena wrapped her fingers around him. He was hot, velvet hard, pulsing in her grip. She stroked once, twice, watching his jaw clench, his eyes squeezed shut. Condom, she managed. Wallet, back pocket. She fished it out, tore the packet with shaking teeth. He rolled it on with practiced ease. Too much ease, maybe, and something possessive twisted in her chest at the thought of other girls, other nights. She pushed it away. He stepped closer, notched himself at her entrance, and paused. Look at me. She did. Last chance to say no. She hooked her ankles behind his back, pulled him in. He sank into her in one long, steady thrust. They both groaned, low, wrecked sounds that tangled together in the quiet room. He was big enough to stretch her, to make her feel every inch, but she was so wet, so ready, that it was only pleasure, sharp and bright. He stayed still for a moment, forehead pressed to hers, breathing hard. You feel, he swallowed. Fuck, Elena. She clenched around him on purpose. His hips snapped forward involuntarily, driving deeper. She gasped. Then he started to move. Slow at first, long, deliberate strokes that let her feel him dragging against every sensitive place inside her. Then faster. Harder. The desk creaked beneath them. Pens rolled off the edge and clattered to the floor. She didn't care. She met every thrust, rocking up to take him deeper, nails raking down his back through the t-shirt. His mouth found her throat, her collarbone, the swell of her breast still half exposed. He sucked a mark just above the lace of her bra, high enough she'd have it covered tomorrow with strategically placed scarves. The thought made her clench again. Touch yourself, he rasped. I want to feel you come on my cock. She slid her hand between them, fingers finding her clit, circling in the rhythm he'd taught her with his mouth. The added pressure tipped her toward the edge almost immediately. Rowan, I know. Let go. I've got you. She shattered. The orgasm hit like a wave breaking, white hot, endless. She cried out his name, loud enough that if anyone had been in the hallway, they would have heard. Her walls pulsed around him, milking him, pulling him under with her. He followed seconds later, hips stuttering, a guttural sound torn through his throat as he buried himself deep and came hard inside the condom, shuddering against her. For long moments, neither of them moved, just ragged breathing. The rain still hammering the windows, the faint metallic tick of the radiator in the corner. He lifted his head first, kissed her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. We're not done, he murmured. She laughed, breathless, dazed. We're on school property. I know. He eased out of her carefully, tied off the condom, dropped it into the small metal trash can beneath her desk like it belonged there. Then he looked at her, hair wild, blouse half unbuttoned. Skirt rucked up around her hips, lips kiss bruised, and something fierce flickered in his eyes. "Take me home," he said. Elena stared at him. Then she slid off the desk on legs that still trembled, smoothed her skirt down with shaking hands, and reached for her coat. "Get your things," she told him. "We're leaving before the night custodian does his rounds." He grinned. Slow, dangerous, entirely too satisfied. "Yes, Ms. Voss." They slipped out the side door near the art wing, the one the smokers always propped open with a brick during lunch. The rain had eased to a cold, steady mist that beaded on Elena's coat and darkened Rowan's hair in seconds. He walked half a step behind her. Not protective, exactly, but close enough that their shoulders brushed every few strides. Neither spoke until they reached her silver Accord in the far corner of the lot, the only car left on the flickering security light. She unlocked it with the key fob. The chirp sounded absurdly loud in the wet quiet. Rowan slid into the passenger seat without hesitation, long legs folding in, backpack tossed carelessly into the footwell. Elena started the engine, cranked the heat, and pulled out slowly, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the drizzle. The drive to her apartment took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of charged silence broken only by the slap of wipers, the low hum of the radio she never bothered to change from a classical station, and the occasional soft creak of the leather when he shifted. She could feel his eyes on her profile, studying the way streetlights slid across her cheekbones, the way her fingers flexed on the wheel. She parked in her assigned spot beneath the building's overhang, killed the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in. Rowan unbuckled first, turned toward her. "You sure about this?" he asked. Elena met his gaze. "Are you?" He answered by leaning across the console and kissing her. Slow this time, almost careful, like he was giving her one last out. She answered by sliding her hand into his damp hair and pulling him closer. They made it as far as the stairwell before restraint cracked again. He pressed her against the concrete wall between the first and second floors, mouth on her throat, hands shoving her coat open. She arched into him, fingers working his belt loose while he hiked her skirt high enough to hook her leg around his hip. The stairwell smelled of damp plaster and old paint. The single bulb overhead buzzed faintly. Anyone could have come down from the third floor. No one did. They stumbled the rest of the way up, laughing breathlessly when she fumbled the key at her door, groaning when he crowded her inside the moment it swung open and kicked it shut behind them. Her apartment was small, orderly in a way single women who grade papers at home tend to keep things. Books double-stacked on every surface, a half-dead fern by the window, a bottle of Pinot Noir breathing on the kitchen counter from 2 nights ago. Rowan didn't pause to look. He backed her toward the couch, shedding his hoodie, his t-shirt, towing off his sneakers in a careless pile. Elena kicked her own heels into the corner, reached behind to unzip her skirt, let it pull at her feet. She stood there in blouse and bra and thigh-high stockings, the one she'd worn because the classroom got cold after 3. Not because she planned any of this, and watched the way his eyes darkened. "Bedroom," she said, voice rough. He scooped her up without warning, arms under her thighs, lifting her so her legs wrapped around his waist. She gasped, then laughed against his mouth as he carried her down the short hallway. They didn't make it all the way to the bed. He set her on the dresser instead, the mirror cold against her back, bottles of perfume and a stack of unopened mail rattling when he set her down. Clothes came off in a hurry now. Her blouse hit the floor. His jeans followed, bra unhooked with one practiced flick of his fingers. When she was bare except for the stockings, he stepped back, just a half step, and looked at her like she was something rare and dangerous. "Fuck," he breathed. "You're beautiful." She hooked a finger in the waistband of his boxers and tugged him forward. "Stop talking." He didn't argue. This time there was no desk between them, no condom wrapper to fumble with. He'd already grabbed another from his wallet before they left the car. He rolled it on while she watched, then stepped between her thighs again. She guided him inside her with one hand braced on his shoulder, the other tangled in his hair. He thrust deep on the first stroke, hard enough that the mirror rattled against the wall. She cried out, sharp, surprised pleasure, and he swallowed the sound with his mouth. They found a rhythm quickly. Fast, almost punishing, the dresser thumping against the wall in time with his hips. Her nails scored red lines down his back. His fingers dug into her hips hard enough to bruise. She came first again, head thrown back, reflection showing her flushed cheeks, parted lips, eyes half-lidded. He watched in the mirror over her shoulder, jaw clenched, fighting to hold on. When her spasms eased, he pulled out, spun her around so she faced a mirror, bent her over the dresser with one hand between her shoulder blades. "Look at yourself," he said, voice gravel rough. She did, saw her own wrecked expression, breasts swaying with each breath, his larger frame behind her, one hand gripping her hip while the other guided himself back inside. He fucked her like that, deep relentless, until her arms gave out and she braced on her forearms, forehead pressed to the cool wood. His free hand slid around to find her clit again, rubbing tight circles that matched his thrusts. "Again!" he growled against her ear. "Come for me again." She did. Harder this time, whole body shaking, a sob caught in her throat. He followed almost immediately, burying himself to the hilt and pulsing inside her, low groan vibrating against her spine. They stayed like that for long seconds, panting, slick with sweat, the room smelling of sex and rain, and the faint lavender of her sheets down the hall. He eased out carefully, disposed of the condom in the small bathroom trash, then came back and lifted her into his arms again, this time gentle, bridal style. Bedroom this time. Actual bed. He laid her down on the duvet, followed her onto the mattress, pulling the covers over them both. She curled against his chest without thinking. He wrapped an arm around her waist, fingers tracing lazy patterns on her lower back. Outside, the rain had picked up again, drumming on the metal balcony railing. "Stay," she whispered into the dark. He kissed the top of her head. Wasn't planning on leaving. Her laugh was soft, sleepy. "We're going to have to talk about this tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, already drowsy. "Not tonight." She closed her eyes, listened to his heartbeat slow beneath her cheek, felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel alone in the quiet. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small, insistent voice reminded her that tomorrow was Monday. That first period started at 7:55. That he would walk into her classroom in less than 12 hours, wearing the same hoodie, carrying the same backpack, looking at her with those same storm-gray eyes. She pushed the thought away. Tonight, at least, the world could wait. Morning light sliced through the half-closed blinds and thin, pale bars across the sheets. Elena woke first, the way she always did, slowly, with a vague disorientation of someone who had slept deeper than usual. Her body felt heavy, pleasantly sore in places she hadn't acknowledged in years. Rowan's arm was still draped over her waist, his breath warm, and even against the nape of her neck. He hadn't moved much in sleep. One leg tangled with hers, chest pressed to her back like he was afraid she might disappear before dawn. She lay still for several minutes, listening to the soft patter of leftover rain on the balcony, the distant rumble of early traffic on the arterial road below. The clock on the nightstand read 6:12. First bell was 7:55. She had exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes to decide whether last night had been a catastrophic mistake or the most honest thing she'd done in a decade. Carefully, she slipped from under his arm. He stirred but didn't wake, only murmured something unintelligible and rolled onto his stomach, face half buried in her pillow. The sheet slipped low on his hips, exposing the long muscles of his back, the faint red lines her nails had left. She stared for a moment, too long, then forced herself into bathroom. Hot shower. Scalding, almost punitive. She stood under the spray until her skin turned pink, trying to wash away the scent of him, the memory of his mouth, the way he'd looked at her in a mirror like she was the only thing that had ever mattered. It didn't work. When she stepped out and wrapped herself in a thick terry robe, her reflection showed flushed cheeks, kissed bruised lips, and eyes that looked brighter, more alive than they had in months. Back in the bedroom, Rowan was awake, propped on one elbow, hair wrecked, sheet pulled around his waist. He watched her cross the room without speaking, expression unreadable. "Morning," she said. The word felt too ordinary. "Morning." His voice was gravel from sleep and everything else. He sat up fully, the sheet falling away, unself-conscious, beautiful in that careless, youthful way that made her chest ache. She sat on the edge of the mattress, keeping a deliberate foot of space between them. "We need to talk." He nodded once. "Yeah." Silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just thick with everything unsaid. "I'm not going to pretend last night didn't happen," she began. "But I also can't pretend it changes the rules. You're my student. I'm your teacher. There are laws, ethics codes, careers, futures. If anyone finds out, they won't. You don't know that. I know I'm not going to tell anyone." He reached out, brushed his knuckles along her forearm. "And I know you're not either." She caught his hand, held it between both of hers. "It's not that simple, Rowan. Isn't it?" He turned his palm up, laced their fingers. "We're both adults. What happened was consensual. More than consensual. It wasn't coercion. It wasn't power imbalance in the way people pretend it always is. I wanted you since the first time you called me out in class for bullshitting my way to a seminar on Mrs. Dalloway. You wanted me too. You just took longer to admit it." She exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. "Arrogant. Accurate." She looked down at their joined hands. His were larger, rougher at the knuckles from years of debate gestures and occasional pickup basketball. Hers smaller, ink-stained from grading, nails bitten short from stress. "I could lose everything," she said quietly. "I know." He squeezed her fingers. "So could I. Colleges don't like scandals attached to their incoming freshmen, even if the scandal is 6 months old by the time applications are due." She raised her eyes to his. "Then why risk it? Because the alternative is spending the rest of senior year pretending I don't feel like this. Pretending every time you call on me, my heart doesn't try to climb out of my chest. Pretending I don't notice the way you pause when our eyes meet, like you're afraid of what might happen if you don't look away fast enough." He leaned closer. "I'm not good at pretending. Elena, not about this." She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, the decision was already made. She could feel it settling in her bones like the first sip of strong coffee. "Ground rules," she said. He waited. No touching at school. Ever. Not even a brush of hands, passing back a paper. No lingering after class unless it's about actual academic work. And even then, door stays open, desk between us. Agreed. No text that can't be explained as school-related. Nothing after 10 p.m. Nothing that could be screenshotted and weaponized. Fine. You graduate in 7 months. Until then, this, she gestured between them, stays here. My apartment. Nowhere else. No hotels, no cars, no empty classrooms. And when you walk across that stage in May, whatever this is either ends cleanly or we figure out what comes next. But only after the diploma is in your hand. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I can live with that." She exhaled, tension bleeding out of her shoulders. "Good." He tugged her forward gently until she was straddling his lap, robe parting around her thighs. His hand settled on her hips, light, respectful of the new boundaries even now. "One more thing," she murmured against his mouth. "Name it." "You call me Ms. Voss at school. Every time. No first names. No slips, not even in private moments when no one else can hear." His lips curved. "Yes, Ms. Voss." The title in his mouth sent a fresh shiver through her. She kissed him, slow, deliberate, sealing the agreement. His hand slid up her back beneath the robe, warm palms mapping her spine. She rocked against him once, feeling him harden beneath her, and smiled into the kiss. "We have 40 minutes before we need to leave," she whispered. "Plenty of time," he answered, already tugging the tie of her robe loose. They moved together more slowly this morning. Less desperation, more deliberate exploration. He rolled them so she was beneath him, sheets tangling around their legs. He kissed his way down her body with the same patience he'd shown the night before, lingering at every place that made her breath catch. The curve of her breast, the dip of her waist, the sensitive skin just inside her hip. When he settled between her thighs again, she threaded her fingers through his hair and let him take his time. Let him draw it out until she was trembling, pleading softly. Afterward, they showered together. Quick, efficient, but still intimate. His hand soaping her back, hers tracing the lines of his shoulders. No words. Just touch and steam and the quiet understanding that this was theirs now. Fragile and forbidden and real. They dressed in silence. Her in a navy sheath dress and cardigan. Conservative, professional, nothing that whisper of last night. Him in yesterday's jeans and hoodie, hair still damp. Looking every inch the high-achieving senior. At the door, she stopped with a hand on his chest. Rowan. He looked down at her, serious. Be careful today. Please. He nodded, leaned down and pressed the briefest, chastest kiss to her forehead. You too, Ms. Voss. Then he was gone. Down the stairwell, out into gray morning, backpack slung over one shoulder like any other Monday. Elena locked the door behind him, leaned against it for a long moment, heart hammering. 7 months. She could survive 7 months of pretending. She hoped. The first bell rang at 7:55 exactly, a shrill electronic tone that cut through the hallway chatter like a scalpel. Elena stood at the front of room 214, marker in hand, finishing the agenda on the whiteboard. The Great Gatsby, chapters 7 to 9/symbolism and unreliable narration/thesis workshop. Her handwriting was neat, controlled. Nothing betrayed the tremor that had lingered in her fingers all morning. Students filed in. Rowan last, as always. Backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie zipped halfway, earbuds dangling from his neck. He didn't look at her directly, just dropped into his usual seat in the third row, pulled out his notebook, and began doodling something in the margin. A casual observer would have seen nothing unusual. Elena felt every inch of the 12 feet between them like live wire. Good morning, she said to the room. Her voice came out steady, professional. Open to chapter 7. We're starting with a confrontation in the Plaza Hotel. She launched into the lesson the way she always did. Questions, close reading, pulling quotes apart like thread from cloth. When she called on Rowan, third question in, deliberate choice, he answered without hesitation. The heat isn't just weather, he said, leaning back in his chair. It's pressure. Everyone's boiling over. Gatsby's pushing Daisy to say she never loved Tom, but she can't. She's trapped between wanting to be free and being terrified of actually being free. Elena nodded once. Precisely. And what does that say about class as a cage? He met her eyes for the first time that day. Brief, impersonal, perfectly appropriate. It says the cage is gilded. You can see out, but the bars are still there. A few students murmured agreement. Someone in the back coughed. Elena turned back to board, wrote gilded cage in neat cursive, underlined it twice. No one noticed the way her pulse jumped at his voice, saying those words in this room. No one noticed the way Rowan's pen paused for half a second before moving again. The hour passed in measured increments. She returned essays at the end of class, his on top of the stack, B+ circled in red, the same grade she'd given him weeks ago. When she placed it on his desk, their fingers didn't touch. Not even close. Have a good day, she said to the room as the bell rang. Rowan stood, shouldered his bag, walked out with the crowd. He didn't look back. Elena stayed behind to erase the board. The squeak of the eraser was the only sound. When the hallway finally quieted, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lunch was 43 minutes of pretending to eat a salad in the faculty lounge, while Ms. Hargrove from history complained about budget cuts, and Mr. Patel from math showed everyone pictures of his new granddaughter. Elena smiled at the appropriate moments, nodded, contributed just enough to seem present. Inside her head the morning replayed on loop, his voice, his eyes, the careful distance he kept. Fifth period was her prep. She locked the classroom door, lowered the blinds halfway, sat at her desk and stared at the spot on the floor where his hoodie had lain the Friday before. Her phone buzzed once. School email, nothing personal. She checked anyway. Nothing. Good. At 3:15 the final bell rang. Students flooded the halls. Elena packed her tote slowly, methodically. When the building began to empty, she walked her car. Same route, same parking spot. The Accord was still damp from yesterday's rain. She drove home without music. The silence felt deliberate. Her apartment smelled faintly of him. Cedar, rain, the ghost of last night's sheets. She dropped her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes, poured a glass of the Pinot that had been breathing too long, took one sip, set it down. The knock came at 4:08. She opened the door without checking the peephole. Rowan stood there in the hallway light, hoodie up against a late afternoon chill, backpack at his feet. No smile, just that steady gray gaze. "I waited until the parking lot cleared," he said. She stepped aside. He came in. The door clicked shut behind him. They didn't speak for the first 30 seconds. He shrugged off the hoodie, hung it on the back of a chair. She watched the way his shoulders moved, the way the hallway light caught the faint bruise she'd left on his collarbone Friday night. "You were perfect today," she said finally. "So were you." Another beat. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Stopped just short of touching her. 7 months, he reminded her, voice low. 7 months, she echoed. Then she reached up, curled her fingers in the front of his t-shirt, and pulled him down. The kiss started careful, testing the new rules, the daylight boundaries. It didn't stay careful long. His hands found her waist, her slid under his shirt, palms flat against warm skin. They moved backward together until her back met the kitchen counter. He lifted her onto it in one smooth motion. She wrapped her legs around him, ankles locking at the small of his back. Clothes came off slower than the night before. Deliberate, like they were memorizing every button, every zipper, every inch of revealed skin. When she was down to bra and skirt, him in boxers, he paused. "Tell me what you want," he murmured against her throat. She tilted his chin up so their eyes met. "Everything," she said, "but slow. We have time." He smiled, small, private, devastating. They did have time. He carried her to the bedroom this time, laid her down like something precious, stripped the rest of her clothes away with careful hands, kissed every new inch of skin he uncovered. When he settled between her thighs again, it was unhurried. Long licks, gentle suction, fingers curling inside her until she was arching off the mattress, whispering his name like a secret. After she came, shuddering, fingers knotted in his hair. He rose over her, kissed her through the aftershocks. She reached between them, guided him inside. No rush, just deep, rolling thrust that made her gasp every time he bottomed out. She met him stroke for stroke, nails dragging lightly down his back, legs wrapped high around his waist. They moved like that for what felt like hours, changing angles, changing rhythms, pausing to kiss, to breathe, to look at each other in the fading afternoon light. When he finally felt her start to tighten around him again, he slipped a hand between them, thumbs circling her clit in the exact rhythm she liked. "Come with me," he whispered. She did. He followed seconds later, burying his face in her neck, hips stuttering as he spilled inside the condom with a low, broken groan. They stayed tangled together afterward, breathing in sync. The room smelled of sex and her lavender candle, and the rain that had started again outside. Eventually he rolled to the side, pulled her against his chest. His fingers traced idle patterns on her hip. "Tomorrow," he asked quietly. "Same rules." "Same rules," he agreed. She pressed a kiss to his sternum, right over his heart. "Stay until 6, she said. "Then you go. Early dinner at home. Homework. Normal senior life." He chuckled softly. Normal as it gets. They lay there listening to the rain until the light turned golden, then amber, then gray. At 5:58, he kissed her one last time, slow, lingering, then dressed. She watched from the bed. Sheet pulled to her chest, hair erect. At the door he paused. "See you tomorrow, Ms. Voss." She smiled, small, secret. "Tomorrow, Rowan." The door closed softly behind him. Elena stayed in bed another 10 minutes, listening to the building settle into evening quiet. Then she rose, wrapped herself in a robe, poured the untouched wine down the sink, and started grading the next stack of essays. 7 months. She could do this. She had to. 7 months passed like pages turning in a book neither of them could put down. Slow, deliberate, dangerous. They became masters of restraint. In the classroom, he sat in the 3rd row, eyes forward, answers sharp and impersonal. She called on him only when necessary, praised his insights with the same measured tone she used for everyone else. After the final bell, he left with the crowd, hoodie up, backpack slung low. No backward glances, no lingering. But the afternoons belonged to them. Her apartment became their sanctuary. The door would close at 4:15 or 4:20, and the rules dissolved. Clothes fell away. Hands remembered every map they'd drawn on each other's skin. Some days were frantic, counter, shower, against the hallway wall before they even reached the bedroom. Others were slow, almost reverent. Hours spent tracing scars and stretch marks, whispering secrets into collarbones, learning how breath could turn into begging, without a single word louder than a sigh. They never spoke of love. Not directly. Love was too heavy, too permanent, too likely to shatter under the weight of what they were doing. Instead, they said things like, "Stay another hour," or "I miss the way you taste," or simply each other's names in the dark, like prayers. Spring came. Prom happened. Rowan went with Junior from the debate team. Pretty, safe, temporary. Elena stayed home with a bottle of wine and old movies, telling herself it didn't hurt. When he showed up at her door at 1:47 a.m., tuxedo jacket slung over his shoulder, bow tie undone, smelling faintly of corsage roses and someone else's perfume, she let him in without a word. He kissed her like apology. She kissed him back like forgiveness. Graduation arrived on a Saturday in late May. Sky painfully blue, stadium bleachers packed with proud parents and restless siblings. Elena sat on the faculty riser in her black robe, mortarboard slightly crooked, watching the procession. When Rowan's name was called, Rowan Calder, valedictorian, the crowd roared. He walked across the stage with that same careless grace, shook the principal's hand, accepted his diploma, then turned and found her in the sea of black robes. Their eyes met for 3 full seconds. Nothing dramatic. No wink. No smile that could be photographed and misinterpreted. Just a look that said, "We made it." After the ceremony, the parking lot was chaos. Hugs, photos, toss caps. Rowan disappeared into the throng of classmates. Elena stayed behind to help collect programs, stack chairs, avoid small talk. At 7:42 p.m., her phone buzzed once. Outside, black Jeep, passenger door unlocked. She drove home first, changed out of robe into jeans and a soft sweater, left her hair down, took the stairs 2 at a time. When she reached his building, he was waiting on the curb, cap still in his hand, gown folded over his arm like a flag of truce. No hoodie tonight, just a white button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the faint outline of the valedictorian medal still pinned to his chest. They didn't speak until they were inside his dorm room. Single, sparse, already half-packed for the move to college in August. The door closed. The world narrowed to 4 walls, a narrow bed and the 2 of them. He kissed her first this time, slow, deep, final in a way that made her chest ache. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm yours," he said quietly. "If you want me, no more hiding. No more rules. Just us." She closed her eyes, felt the years between them shrink to nothing. "I've been yours since the night the rain wouldn't stop," she whispered. They made love like people who had waited lifetimes instead of months, unhurried, reverent. Every touch carrying the weight of everything they hadn't been allowed to say. When he moved inside her, she held his face between her hands, watched every flicker of emotion cross those storm-gray eyes. When she came, it was with his name on her lips, soft and sure. When he followed, shuddering, he buried his face in her neck and said the 3 words they both avoided for so long. "I love you." She said them back into his hair, voice breaking just a little. Afterward, they lay tangled in his too small bed, city lights bleeding through the blinds, painting stripes across their skin. "What now?" he asked into quiet. She traced the line of his jaw with one fingertip. "Now you go to college. You study. You grow. You become the man I already see when I look at you." She smiled against his shoulder. "And I keep teaching. I finished the PhD I abandoned. I write the book I've been too afraid to start. We talk every day. We visit when we can. We don't rush. And when the distance feels too big, we remember nights like this one," she said, "and we come back together." He turned his head, kissed her temple. "Promise me something." "Anything. When I graduate college, 4 years from now, you let me take you somewhere. No classrooms. No handbooks. Just you and me in time that finally belongs to us." She laughed softly, the sound muffled against his chest. I promise. They fell asleep like that, limbs entwined, breathing matched, the future stretching out before them like an open road after years of locked doors. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent. Inside, two people who had risked everything to find each other finally allowed themselves to believe that sometimes the most forbidden stories don't end in ruin. Sometimes they end in beginnings.